Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Monday on GB News. Join my new show, Bev Turner Today, from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday on GB News, on TV, on radio and online.
Good evening, welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight, find out why one of the firms that produced a COVID vaccine is the subject of a Freedom of Information request. I'll meet the incredible man who's running a marathon every day this year. And in a few minutes, I'll show why pursuing net zero will condemn hundreds of millions to death. All of that and more coming up. But first, an update on the latest news from Ray Addison.
Thanks, Neil. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The firebombing of an immigration processing centre in Dover was motivated by an extreme right-wing terrorist ideology, according to police. Counter-terrorism officers have recovered digital media devices as part of their investigation. Andrew Leake from High Wycombe is believed to have thrown up to 3 incendiary devices at the centre last weekend. However, there were no major injuries. The 66-year-old was later found dead by police at a nearby petrol station. GB News has learned that detainees armed with various weapons have caused a disturbance at an immigration centre in London. The Home Office says the incident happened in the early hours of this morning during a power cut at Harmondsworth Removal Centre. No one was injured and authorities remain at the scene. The centre currently has more than 600 immigrants being processed for removal from the UK. The United Nations chief says the world is doomed unless a historic pact is signed between rich and poor countries. The warning from Antonio Guterres comes ahead of the COP27 summit next week. Wealthy nations have already promised to find almost £88 billion a year to help poorer nations tackle climate change. The scheme was originally meant to start in 2020, but it's now not expected to happen until next year. A series of rail strikes, which were due to start today, have been called off, but the government warns there'll still be significant disruption over the next few days. The RMT stopped the walkout after securing a pay offer, which they're now negotiating. Not everyone supports the move. Former Assistant General Secretary at the RMT, Steve Headley, told us members are furious as they had no say.
In a situation where the strike's been called off and the members don't know why. And the explanations being given at the minute don't make sense. Intensive negotiations, well, what were they doing before? If there's a deal on the table, let the members have a look at it. The members will soon say yes or no.
Sinn Féin's leader says a joint authority between the British and Irish governments should be introduced if the executive in Northern Ireland cannot be restored. Mary Lou MacDonald made the comments ahead of her keynote speech at her party's conference this evening. The country has been without a functioning executive since February, as the DUP continues to boycott the Assembly over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Chair of the Northern Ireland Conservatives, Matthew Robinson, told GB News a solution must be found.
We either need a restoration of the devolved government, or we need some form of direct rule from Westminster. We deserve proper governance in Northern Ireland. We have a collapsing healthcare system here. I mean, we are in dire straits in terms of waiting times. We are in the middle of a cost of living crisis as well, just like the rest of the UK. We need proper governance.
The French far-right party National Rally has elected a new leader to take over from Marine Le Pen. 27-year-old Jordan Bardella will replace her, marking the first time in the party's 50-year history where it's not been led by a member of the Le Pen family. Ms Le Pen says she'll now focus on leading the party's group in Parliament after taking 89 seats in the National Assembly earlier on this year. Twitter workers in the UK facing job cuts have been given 3 days to nominate a representative ahead of employment negotiations. Mr Musk has defended his decision to sack around half of the company's workforce, saying they were offered 3 months redundancy pay. Meanwhile, amid concerns over disinformation on the site, Elon Musk is adamant the company's commitment to content moderation has not been compromised. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to Neil Oliver.
Remember Band Aid and Live Aid? First the charity single in December 1984, and then the stadium events in Wembley and Philadelphia in the summer of '85. BBC journalist Michael Burke had reported on a biblical famine in Ethiopia, harrowing coverage that went viral even in the years before social media. In response, musicians Bob Geldof and Midge Ure collaborated on both the single and the concerts, viewed by nearly 2 billion people in 150 countries, and a fundraising legend was born. Feed the World was the chorus of the single. Let them know it's Christmas time. Feed the world. And in our world of plenty, they sang, we can spread a smile of joy, throw your arms around the world at Christmas time. It's not Christmas time yet, of course, but winter is coming. Both of those aid efforts raised fortunes from a public moved to help the ghostly shadows of fellow human beings they were shown dying before their eyes. To this day, there's debate about how much Live Aid changed or improved things in Ethiopia, how much food got into the mouths of the starving, and how much money was diverted into the coffers of the Ethiopian government that had deliberately worsened the impact of the famine. The media concentrated on a simple story of drought killing crops year after year, causing famine. In fact, while natural forces were at play, the worst of the harm to humanity was caused not by nature, but by the inhumanity of corrupt politicians deliberately and calculatedly denying food to that part of their own population they regarded as their enemy in a savage civil war. There's no denying, however, that as far as most of the watching billions were concerned, what mattered was getting food to people in desperate need. They were shown pictures of people starving to death in the present, right there and then, and put their hands in their pockets in hopes of helping before it was too late. It was all about rescuing fellow human beings sharing the same planet in the same moment. Media, pop stars and scores of other celebs, backed by a generous, well-meaning public, all united to try and feed the world. Revered economist Amartya Sen has described how people end up starving en masse, not on account of natural disasters, but because governments and other bad actors see to it that they are denied food. Quote, starvation is the characteristic of some people not getting enough food to eat. It is not the characteristic of there not being enough food to eat. Fast forward nearly 40 years after Live Aid and have a look at what the media and much of the rest of the mainstream are calling for now. The Green Agenda, Agenda 2030, Net Zero and the rest of a hellish potpourri of policies guaranteed to condemn hundreds of millions to death by poverty, death by starvation, misery for want of the means ever to make their lives better. Half a lifetime after Live Aid and earnest hopes of throwing arms around the world, the new clarion call is to snuff out the lights here in the West, to usher in the cold where there has been warmth, and to see to it that the achievement of the Industrial Revolution and centuries of ingenuity that conspired to lift billions of people around the world out of poverty are dismantled and unwound. Upon the altar of the new religion of saving the planet of tomorrow, prioritising that as yet non-existent world over the here and now, millions upon millions of those living today, perhaps billions in the end, are to be sacrificed as though they don't exist. Any last vestige of camouflage preventing us perceiving the true nature of the messiahs of the green agenda is falling away day by day. Celebrity truant Greta Thunberg's latest proclamation is that it's time to transform the West's oppressive and racist capitalist system. She means overthrow it, thereby laying bare at last the motivation of her handlers. And it has nothing to do with ensuring the future for generations to come. It's about gifting the planet to the few right now. Orwell said about the communists of his day that they don't give a damn about the poor, they just hate the rich. By the rich, Orwell meant the titled and entitled rich. By now, the shadows behind Thunberg are the super rich, the ultra rich, and those richest of the rich loathe and wish to see utterly destroyed by their cynical reworking of communism the uppity middling sort, those with the temerity to seek to own their own homes, to own their own businesses, indeed to own much of anything at all, bar a smartphone with a digital ID built in alongside a wallet for programmable food tokens. Don't overlook either the fact that the sock puppets of Just Stop Oil are financed in part by millions of dollars from the granddaughter of oil tycoon J. Paul Getty. The decadent, self-indulgent, hypocritical virtue signalling is enough to make a billy goat lose his lunch. Where Live Aid called for help for those alive now, if only barely living, now the latest righteous insist those clinging by their fingertips to the outside edge of existence don't matter and must be ignored, cast aside as collateral damage. Who cares about the inconvenient living when there's a fantasy future to sell to the gullible? Where the great and the good and the media once sought to save those at death's door, now they back policies guaranteed to hustle the huddled masses through that exit with a swift kick to their bony backsides. What we're witnessing is an unholy inversion of the human and humane urge to offer help to fellow travellers along a road that's already too hard for billions. Upon that road, we have lost our way. At the same time, our humanity, what makes us human, is being readied for consignment to the dustbin of history. Why have messy, maddening humans when you can have the product of binary code that does what it's told? Estimates of the death toll for the Ethiopian famine of the mid-1980s ranged from 300,000 to 1.2 million. Millions more were displaced, made refugees. Some of the same characters who campaigned to help those poor back then, in league now with their 21st century successors, have linked arms in support of ruinous policies that might mean the death sentence not for 1 million people in one country, but for hundreds of millions in all manner of countries around the world in the years ahead. If you were going to set out deliberately to ensure the poorest people in the world's poorest countries were kept in murderous poverty or newly cast into that hell, then you would deny them access to cheap energy while simultaneously undermining the ability of the developed world to produce and distribute the food surplus that might keep them alive in the meantime. Those are precisely and unavoidably the consequences of net zero and the rest of the nonsense that will be preached at COP27, as well as day after day by politicians of all stripes and a consistently complicit media. Having carefully and forensically rubbished the history of the West, rewriting our heritage and cultural inheritance until the efforts of our predecessors are made a litany only of evil, cruelty and greed, fit for nothing but tearing down and forgetting, and persuading too many that the present is as flawed and shameful as that past, if not more so, those latest self-appointed saviours of the world are busy selling their insane and utterly unachievable vision of the future. The road to that halcyon future, populated by its green-living, fake meat and insect-eating, docile, compliant and perpetually spied-upon citizens, is to be laid upon the corpses of the inconvenient, here and now, real-life poor, all the messy millions of them. All those souls in want right now of accessible, reliable energy that might power them towards the sort of lives we have enjoyed here, in desperate need of abundant food of the sort that has for generations been available to us thanks to the enterprise, invention and sheer hard work of clever farmers raising livestock and crops with the help of skills and wisdom learned over millennia, all are to be dismissed to oblivion so that ideologues of the WEF, the WHO, the UN, the prophets of Agenda 2030 and Net Zero can realise their fantasies of control. Feed the world, remember? And in our world of plenty we can spread a smile of joy. Throw your arms around the world. Not now, we won't. Not anytime soon, and maybe never again. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are usually pictured together, and for a reason. Where there's a famine, there will soon be disease, and then war, and always, always death. During times of hunger, most of the dying is caused by the opportunistic diseases lying in wait. Chaos soon reigns, and war is invariably the consequence as factions fight to seize or to maintain control. The shadow of the four will loom yet again over hundreds of millions of the world's poorest and most desperate people. And in the West, shivering in our homes, wondering for the first time in generations what sort of food we will have to eat, how we will heat our homes, won't be throwing our arms around anyone except ourselves for warmth. Feed the world? I don't think so. Another ghost from the past is worth a second look now. In 2006, Al Gore launched his film An Inconvenient Truth about the imminent end of civilization due to man-made global warming. The real inconvenient truth is that Gore's predictions from a movie that netted $50 million at the box office have not come to pass. The prophet of doom, now worth $300 million, who said we could all help save the world by changing our lifestyles, has a $2.5 million home in Nashville with an annual energy bill of $30,000. It's worth wondering how often he sits inside and notes that while he said the ice caps would be gone by now, they've grown in size. Or how often he remembers that while he said the polar bears would drown, their numbers have risen steadily for the last 15 years. The man who said Manhattan would be underwater on account of rising sea levels just bought a $9 million villa on the coast of California. Always remember this: the green agenda we're being sold is absolutely not green, requiring as it does the unprecedented mining of hitherto unimagined amounts of base and rare earth metals, also rare minerals, all of that effort dependent upon fossil fuels, the never-ending rape of the world we're supposed to be saving. The International Energy Agency predicts it will be 2207 at the earliest before fossil fuels are set aside. In the US, the Biden administration predicts that even if all governments keep their promises, CO2 eradication cannot occur before 2242, more than 200 years from now. There's food aplenty in this world, there's energy aplenty, but we are to be denied both by yet more of those corrupt politicians. Here's the thing, it's the people alive today, here at home and around the world, the poorest included, who deserve life, a better life. They deserve a future that we could give them now. Who with a human heart would sacrifice today's living for nothing more than a fantasy spun from lies? Not me. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can tweet me as well at gbnews, and I'll try to get to some of your comments later in the show. I'm joined this evening by the author and journalist Laura Dodsworth. Good evening, Laura.
Hello.
And the financial expert, founder of moneymagpie.com, Jasmine Birtles.
Hiya.
Hello, Jasmine. How are you?
Good.
Laura, why are the leaders of today so deliberately blind to the consequences, the inevitable consequences of their policies?
Well, I hope that they're just blind. You know, you made a couple of really interesting points. You said there's food aplenty, and, you know, you also referred back to Band-Aid. The thing is, this idea of there not being enough, it's very Malthusian, you know, where the issue of food supply is just down to supply and demand, and that starvation is nature's way of keeping population in check. In fact, there have been so many technological advances in food production, there's more than enough food per head globally. And yet there is still famine. So what causes famines? There's nature, and then there's socio-political causes. You know, in North Korea, they keep their population starving and they hamper food aid efforts. Kind of controversially, but, you know, under 120 years of British rule in India, there were over 30 serious famines in 120 years, but in the 2,000 years before, only 17. The thing about famine is it's a very low technology, low cost way to subjugate people. In this country, we produce over 90% of our wheat consumption, and we basically produce enough meat, milk and dairy also to meet our own consumption. We have no food issue problems in this country. And yet, it's so interesting that there's this concerted attempt, you'd have to be blind to have missed it by now, a concerted attempt to get people to eat insects, even though they don't want to eat insects. And we're told that's best for us. So I think we have to be really wary of these big targets. Think about net zero. Look at the zero in it. It's a flat line. It's a nihilistic. I trust human beings to create systems and solutions to feed ourselves, to provide enough energy. I'm much more sceptical about the kind of authoritarian, technocratic tinkering. Think about the Great Leap Forward. That was a great leap backwards. 38 million people starved in China.
Jasmine, do you trust the leaders, or do you think they're knowingly condemning, on a global scale, millions to suffering?
Well, you know, it's a question of who we mean by leaders. You know, the ones that we have in our governments, I think, in many cases are not really leaders. There's an odd thing that we've seen over the last few years where all leaders, governments seem to be working in lockstep, and very much with as you say, you know, the net zero element. And certainly when it comes to food production, there is clearly, it seems to me, a war on farming and farmers. I mean, we're seeing this very much in Holland, in the Netherlands, which is a major food producer. And for some reason, best known to nobody, as far as I can see, there is a deliberate attempt to reduce this. I mean, really reduce it.
But doesn't it all come back to the Kissinger quote about if you can control the food, you can control the world?
Absolutely. If you and this is what I was thinking as Laura was talking. You know, if you as you say, if you can control the food, you can control the world. At the same time, you know, in my area, it's also been said by Kissinger. You know, if you can control the money, you know, forget the politics. If you can control the money, you're fine. So at the same time as we're having, it seems, the food production absolutely, you know, covered and suppressed, we have central bank digital currencies being mooted all over the world, and the idea there is that you control everything that people are earning, how they spend it, again, what sort of food they spend it on. So you could have the situation where it says, no, you can't spend money on meat. You've had, you know, your ounce of your quota of meat this week, you have to buy bugs, as you say, or horrible processed food. This is, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, you know, about you and I, about processed food. You know, so much of this plant-based stuff, when you look at
when you turn it over and look at the ingredients, it's a chemistry index.
Yes, it's processed. I mean, I grew up being told you're not to eat processed foods, you know, and we keep being told now, don't eat processed foods, and there it is. You know, you can get more processed.
I mean, you look at a beef patty for a burger, and it's just got beef in it.
Yeah.
And then you look at the plant-based alternative, and how long have you got to read the ingredients?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That something that's presumably starts out being inedible has to be put through the ringer until it comes out the other side as something that's vaguely palatable.
Yes.
And we're told this is the future.
Yeah.
There's something else about farming as well, because farming is a very traditional way of life. It connects you with your land. They're archaic practices. It's a really kind of healthful way of living. I know it's really hard work for farmers, but I see this attack on farming as not just about food production. It's about severance with our traditional ancient way of life.
Yeah.
You know, I could be reading too much into it, but it feels like a kind of a multi-pronged attack there.
Yeah.
And you know, do you want your land to have animals on it and grazing and pasture and crops, or massive insect factories? What could go wrong?
Yeah.
What could go wrong with massive insect factories?
Jazz. We'll have to get to a break. After which I'll speak to a retired doctor about the freedom of information request made to AstraZeneca regarding their COVID vaccine. I'll see you shortly.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
News channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. A group of UK doctors and scientists have asked AstraZeneca to release data detailing their research in advance of the rollout of their COVID vaccine. The move by the Heart team comes after the release of Pfizer data in the US following Freedom of Information requests. Paediatrician Dr. Rosamund Jones, one of the signatories of the UK request for the information, joins me now. Hi, Ros.
Hi, hello.
What specifically happened in the US in relation to the release of data?
Well, they had a group who'd set up right from the beginning looking for transparency. And they put in a bid through, they have a similar freedom of information system that we have, but it was turned down by the FDA on the grounds that, it wasn't of public importance, all sorts of extraordinary replies that they wouldn't do it. And in the end, they went to court. They got an injunction to get the data. The FDA then were wriggling and saying, well, they would produce the data, but it would be in 75 years, which isn't kind of much use. And so in the end, they had to give it all out over a period of 8 months. And all that information's come. But we've got no comparable information in the UK for what the MHRA here knew about AstraZeneca. We want the raw data. We want to know what information they had before they decided to roll it out here, and also what safety surveillance they were doing. Why, for example, when countries in Scandinavia were saying this is causing serious life-threatening or actually fatal blood clotting in people, we were still being told, oh, no, don't worry, it's absolutely safe. It was almost told that when France and Germany and all those countries said they wouldn't use it, that this was because they hated the Brits, it was a British drug, and they were because of Brexit. It was sort of ludicrous. And we had given, millions of doses before actually they agreed here it shouldn't be given to anybody under 50.
What proportion of British people who took a vaccine at all would have been given AstraZeneca? I mean, was it the preeminent?
Yes,
Was it the dominant vaccine?
Yes, it was. It was. And if you look at the vaccine injuries, more are AstraZeneca than Pfizer. So when it comes to the people who have recently been had the first compensation payments, they have all been partners of people who have died from blood clots from AstraZeneca, like Lisa Shaw, BBC, for example.
And just to be clear, I think a lot of people think there's a fundamental difference between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and talk of mRNA and the lipid nanoparticle and all that, and what came out of Oxford with AstraZeneca. But how different are they in terms of as vaccines?
Yes, I think they've quietly let people believe that. I mean, I think, I at the beginning was thinking, I don't want mRNA, very novel technology, never have any experience of that at all, assuming that the Oxford one would be using standard Oxford technology because they've got a long track record going back, 30, 40 years of doing vaccines. But then when obviously it came, it was apparent that it was DNA as opposed to RNA, so still a genetic tool. And it's simply the way it gets into the cells. It's linked to a harmless viral vector rather than this lipid nanoparticle.
And is some of your interest, is your interest in obtaining this data and having a better look at it, is it because the AstraZeneca vaccine, it would appear, has been effectively withdrawn, hasn't it? No one's being given it.
Yes, it's very weird. If you look on the government website now to see what, if you're called for your booster and you want to look, it just says AstraZeneca currently unavailable. There's nothing to say why it's unavailable, why it's been dropped. And actually, if there's the evidence that it's much more dangerous than Pfizer is non-existent. I you feel as if Pfizer froze them out of the market. I don't quite know how that happened. And my interest in all this started because I'm a retired paediatrician, as you said, and this started back in February 2021 when I saw Oxford University advertising on the 6 o'clock news. I mean, that's the region where I worked. And they were advertising for children to join a trial when there was no adult safety data. And, as a paediatrician, I've done quite a lot of research, and it is really difficult to get any drug trials past an ethics committee. You have to show that the thing you're treating is common in children and isn't common in adults, and you have to do the studies on children. Otherwise,
presumably dangerous to those children.
You always have to go for adults first, and you can only go on to children after you've really demonstrated that this is totally safe in adults. Then you might think, OK, if kids get the same disease, maybe we'll test it now on children. But I wrote straight away to Andrew Pollard, who I'd known professionally. And I was quite surprised. I got an email back within the hour effectively agreeing that he didn't know it was safe and that's why they were doing the study. And this is completely against international law, to do any research.
In order to find out if it was safe or not, they were going to trial it on children.
Yeah. And the irony of it was, of course, the trial had to be dropped because it was... And at the time, he said to me, don't worry, it's just a very small pilot study, and if it looks good, then we'll do a proper, fully-sized study. This won't be rolled out to children within the next year. No way, he goes, But it was only 4 months after that they were authorising Pfizer for children. But meanwhile, of course, the AstraZeneca got dropped for all the under-50s. So they had to stop recruiting to the children's trial. So, he must have known that was coming.
In terms of these freedom of information applications made in America for Pfizer, now you've made one for AstraZeneca here in the UK, is that in the normal run of things? Does it take a bit of struggle to get the kind of data in these circumstances? Looking back at analogous events in history. Or would you just expect to say, can I have it, and you just be given it?
No, I think they will. I'm sure they'll dig their heels in. They'll try and avoid giving it as much as they can. I mean, we've already, for example, I was part of a judicial review to try and stop the rollout of vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds. And one of the things we produced was data. That was with Dr. Claire Craig, and she'd done some analysis looking at the excess mortality in 15 to 19-year-old males, showing that it was increasing after the start of the vaccination for that age group. And we got as far as ONS agreeing that it was a statistically significant rise, but they still wouldn't investigate it themselves because they said there wasn't enough data. They were waiting for a bigger signal. How many more children had to die before they would investigate it? But they wouldn't give us the data because they said it would be, the word they used was disclosive. And we weren't asking for the children's names and addresses. What we were asking for, there were, 400 deaths when there should have been 300, let's say. And we wanted to know, basically, it could have been just the month they died and whether they were vaccinated and how many days interval between vaccination and death. So it wouldn't have been disclosive in any way, but they wouldn't give us the data. And I'm sure they'll do the same here.
Laura, it's bizarre testimony to my ears listening to this. How do you react to what Rose is saying?
I think that, if there is any link between the vaccine and adverse events, then I think at this stage the government will fight like weasels in a bag not to release it. But in fact, transparent release and sharing of data would be the best way to either calm fears, because, we hear a lot about how anti-vax sentiment is dangerous overall to public health. So the best way to quell that would be transparency. So that's my first thought. Secondly, I think that releasing just a few hundred child deaths data could be disclosive because it would be not beyond the realms of possibility for an investigative journalist to find where those children were and then maybe turn up at the parents' house where they vaccinated or not. It's a bit of a fine line, but over time there should be transparency about it. The other thing that I do wonder, because the MHRA itself attracts fees from pharmaceutical companies. That's part of its funding model. But do you think the fact that it's had £3 million of Gates Foundation funding over a few years, do you think that kind of funding compromises our access to data and the credibility of the agency, or am I reading too much into that?
Well, no, I would have to say I would share your concerns. I think that's one of the things that, to me, has been a total eye-opener in the last 2.5 years. I think I naively thought that the MHRA was a, quango paid for by taxpayers. And in my own professional life, I have trusted advice I've had from the NHS, and the regulators, and assumed that if they said something was safe, it was safe. Now, in this occasion, I've had reason to dig a lot, and the amount of literature out there around the poor safety record of this vaccine is enormous. And yet they're still saying it is safe and effective, and that's all we ever get. And you're quite right. We've never said we think these deaths are due to the vaccine. But at the moment, if you take away that small group of 15 to 19s for the reasons you say, but the large number we're saying, of excess all-cause mortality is now higher in 2022 than it was in 2020, which was the year of this horrendous pandemic. And nobody's investigating. And surely, it's important because either it is the vaccine, in which case that would be quite quick and easy to say, let's stop this, or if it isn't the vaccine, what is it? Surely it's a huge public health concern. They don't know, is it because lockdowns led to build-up of cancer waiting? But that doesn't fit with what I'm hearing.
Transparency is the answer.
It's absent from the media, isn't it?
Oh, completely, yes.
We've been covering it on this channel, but elsewhere, there's just a deafening silence.
There's been something in the Telegraph, a couple of articles by Sarah Napton, in which she's looked at the overall excess deaths. And they've discussed a few options, but the mention of vaccines isn't in the options. And it's the same with you look at the Scottish neonatal deaths. The chairman, I think she's going to be the new president of the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, has said that they're not looking at vaccines because there's no plausible mechanism.
It's insane, isn't it? We keep hearing the science is settled. I mean, I've been talking about this with the governor of the Bank of England. He said the science is settled. Printing money does not create inflation. Yes, it does, actually, as it happens. But, when we keep hearing the science is settled, we know that it isn't. I mean, as you say, there are huge questions, but nobody's willing to ask them. And certainly, if you suggest any article about this to any of the media, as you say, apart from maybe one or two, the odd thing here and there, a complete blank. They don't want to know.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you can't settle science over a totally new product. You have to have an open mind. We've had vaccines that were rushed to market in the past. I mean, you take pandemics after the swine flu, and, that got rolled out widely before. Again, it was the Scandinavians, not us. It was Finland who first noticed brain injury in children for that. And by the time it got withdrawn here, still GlaxoSmithKline never wanted to give all their original data for us to know what was known prior to it being discontinued.
Going to have to leave it there, Ros Jones. Thank you very much for coming in and illuminating us. Hope that we'll keep us up to date with how that request for information goes.
I'll let you know.
We have contacted AstraZeneca and asked them for the response to the Freedom of Information request. Unfortunately, they have not got back to us with anything at all. Moving on, after the break, I'll speak to the woman who is leading the fight back against the sustained attacks of the woke elites. See you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate, and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for big guests, big opinions, and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Those of us determined to defend Great Britain's rich heritage, rituals and traditions against the sustained attacks of the woke elites have a new champion. Founded in 2009, the Common Sense Society aims to explore the ideas, cultures and landscapes that have shaped the history of the world, the better to foster human flourishing. Already established in the US and in several European countries, now the Society has opened a branch here. The director is Emma Webb, broadcaster and political commentator and well known to viewers and listeners of GB News. Emma joins me now. Hi Emma.
Hi Neil.
Great to have you here
Good
again.
to be with you.
Our heritage and traditions are under sustained attack, are they not?
Absolutely. And I think the Common Sense Society in every country where it has a presence is working to try and sustain those principles that we believe maintain human flourishing that has been proven across generations, wisdom that we know works, that sustain beauty, liberty and prosperity, three things that we believe are interdependent. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of decades or more, even over potentially across a few generations now, we've seen this gradual withering away of these fundamental, I suppose you'd say the fundamental soil that allows that flourishing to take place. And that is now really bearing fruits, or the opposite of that. We're actually starting to see, I think, some serious decline in our societies. And so when we talk about common sense, what we're really referring to is that accumulated wisdom across the generations that we're trying to keep the flame burning of in all of those countries where we have a presence.
It's the sense of the commons, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say us, because common sense doesn't always feel, very
particularly
ubiquitous.
common. Yeah, I think, the common sense is this accumulated wisdom that very often people who don't have a voice in society are the real custodians of. And we've seen that slipping away in many aspects of our society. And so what the Common Sense Society does in various different ways in different countries is that we have all sorts of programs. We have fellowship programs that have created an international alumni network. But we also are essentially forming this pre-political network, to call on Roger Scruton's ideas of the pre-political plural. We're quite a broad church. We have people who would describe themselves as being on the left and on the right. We're not a political organisation. As I say, we're pre-political. And we're nurturing that society in the truest sense of the word. And that is in itself a sort of custodian, a champion of that wisdom that has been passed down across the generations, that now I think we see this prevailing idea that, we have individuals who think that you can from scratch create the blueprint for society based on reason alone, that they themselves have come up with this sort of utopian thinking. But actually, on the contrary, what we believe is that there is certain things that have been passed down to us that have been tried and tested that we know work, and we want to keep those things alive so that our societies are able to flourish. And that, as I say, is a sort of pre-political social activity. We're an international network of citizens who are working to forward these principles.
Jasmine, when I hear Emma use a word like beauty,
yeah,
you almost, before you remind yourself not to, you almost are taken aback by the word. It feels as though there's been a prolonged period by which we've been encouraged to be embarrassed by valuing something like beauty.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And it does make you think, that as you mentioned beauty, along with other sort of intellectual elements, you think, but, when you go to a country, for example, China at the moment seems to hate beauty. America, parts of America, some of the American cities, you just think they just really had not thought about beauty at all. And then you go to
Lots
European
of British
cities.
towns.
Come on. Well, yes, no, absolutely true. But then you're in London or one of the Rome, whatever, one of the big cities, and it feeds your soul. You know, beauty is soul. And it's one of those things like poetry. You know, we don't know that we need it, but we do need it. We need it for our existence. And I do think it's marvellous that has been included in the list, because it shows how important it is.
Emma, it feels as though almost the culture of of past generations in your hands and in the present moment almost becomes a counterculture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's almost something there is something rebellious about wanting to say, I want to champion old ideals, ancient ideals.
There is something that's, I think, fundamentally countercultural. I mean, it is in the most explicit sense countercultural, but it is rebellious in some way, because I think that what we're trying to preserve and what we're trying to cultivate is a way of thinking that is almost antithetical to the prevailing ideas in society today. And like you were saying about beauty, you know, the idea that there are certain fundamental prerequisites that society needs in order to make real art possible, in order to allow people to be truly and fundamentally free, to give them their liberty, that there are certain things that make a society prosper and that have, you know, all around the world have liberated people from poverty, have liberated people from totalitarianism. You know, some of the people within our network, including the late Sir Roger Scruton, whose wife Sophie is one of our trustees, they were involved in the underground universities, and there's a real sort of spirit of that underground university in what we're doing, and it's trying to keep that candle burning in the darkness, really, and I think that's what makes us fundamentally different to a lot of organisations that already exist, is that we're sort of upstream from everything else, and we're trying to cultivate those fundamental principles. And it is countercultural because it's not this idea that, you know, that even talking about beauty is somehow anachronistic, that it's some old idea that we should be free and that we should prosper and that we should be surrounded by beauty and feel that we're at home in the world with beautiful landscapes and live in buildings that aren't completely disgustingly ugly, that make people, you know, miserable and atomised. That the idea that there are these principles that are interconnected, that surround us in a kind of ecosystem that allow for that human flourishing, has become a very anachronistic idea, when, you know, the prevailing dominating idea is that, as Laura has talked about so much, is sort of technocrats who want to rule everything by the science.
Laura, you touched on it earlier when we were on another topic about the land and the connection with the land is something that is not to be taken for granted. And if we're cut off at the roots from the land, then we lose almost everything.
Absolutely. Now, I feel a spiritual thirst when you put together this trinity of liberty, prosperity and beauty. I thirst for it. I'm lucky enough to have been to a couple of the Common Sense Society salons. And the funny thing is that you're going to like this, Emma, because Emma's asked me about my political leanings before, and I'm quite apolitical, really, and she's right, it's a very pre-political space. But the thing is, if it didn't feel so radical, I probably wouldn't have discovered some inner socially conservative bones. Because you do have this sense you're in some kind of naughty underground meeting with people that value beauty and liberty. And beauty,
like
of course...
Poet Society.
It is a bit. Beauty is about what we see reflected in nature, and the human spirit is then to see that reflected in architecture, in art, in poetry, in literature, in TV, in everything. We want to see beauty mirrored in the world around us. And it shouldn't be anachronistic to want that, and yet it feels like it is. So anyway, you've made me feel like a radical.
What do we do, Emma? What does each of us do to stand up in defence of the very values that you're describing?
I think that people have to do. They have to get involved. They have to do things. And like I say, we're an international network of citizens across the world, across North America and Europe. Anybody can apply to our fellowship programme. There are lots of ways that people can get involved, signing up to our mailing list, that kind of thing. But as Laura was saying, you know, we have people in our network who are academics, musicians, artists, playwrights, authors, business people from every imaginable sector. And there are lots of people who are within their own spheres of work, are in the darkness. They're surrounded by people where they don't have liberty, prosperity and beauty in their lives. And there is a real catharsis of people coming together, and yes, it's a bit mischievous and it's a bit rebellious in many ways. But there is this kind of momentum and real, like Laura was saying, a thirst for it. And we've discovered that both privately and publicly over the process of our launch. And I think that the fundamental thing for people to do is to do. You have to get out there and you have to live these principles because they don't maintain themselves.
We'll have to leave that there. Emma Webb, it's always lovely to have you here. I'm sure we could talk about this topic alone until 8 o'clock. It's inspiring, so thanks so much for bringing that to us this evening. Another break, sadly, after which I'll be joined by this week's Great Britain, a man who, would you believe, is running a marathon every day this year. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales
And Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, imagine running a marathon beyond the reach of most of us. Imagine running a marathon, 26 miles and change, every day for a year. That's the challenge tonight's Great Britain Gary McKee from Cleatormoor in Cumbria embarked upon on the 1st of January this year. With, I'm guessing, more than 300 marathons behind him, he joins me now. Gary, there you are. You look infeasibly well for someone who's been running a marathon every day since January. How many have you done and how many have you got to go?
So today was day 309, which just leaves 56, 8 weeks today and we'll be finished. New Year's Eve.
Do you keep running the same route, or do you go to different parts of the country and run a marathon there?
No, I do use the same route. There's only 2 days that I haven't actually used the same route. The reason I do that is because it starts and finishes on my doorstep. It gives me time to get back home, do what I need to do, have a bit of food, do my legs, and then go to work. So the route works for me. There's lots of places where people can join me because they know where I'll be at. People who aren't doing a full marathon can come and do however many miles they want to do, and the route works.
I hadn't even factored in the thought that on top of running a marathon every day, you then go to work. So what kind of time are you typically running your marathon in?
When I started, I was knocking them out in just over 3.5 hours, usually around about 3:40. I picked up an injury about 3 months ago, so I've slowed everything down just to manage that injury. They're still all done in under 4 hours as an average.
And what kind of physical or even psychological toll is it taking on you?
Well, physically, I don't think it's taken anything. You do get a little bit stiff, your legs, but I have a massage once a week. I use the sauna as much as I can. I've got a sauna at home. I look after my legs. Obviously, I've lost a little bit of weight by doing what I'm doing. Mentally, I just crack on with it. You get a lot of support from the community, lots of people out, which encourages you. I'm hoping to raise £1 million. We've raised around about $250,000 now. So every day when you're looking at your Just Giving page going up, I've always explained to people that £50 buys a food blender for somebody with throat cancer. And if you look at all the £50 in that £250,000, that's how many people you're reaching out to. So mentally, it's a day at a time. It always has been. It's like a 365-piece jigsaw. One day we put a piece in place and we crack on to the next day.
By the end of it, the arithmetic's beyond me. How far will you have run since the 1st of January when you complete the challenge?
It's the marathon running is around about 9,650 miles, but I do a little bit of warm-up on the treadmill beforehand, a little bit afterwards, keep my legs moving. So I'll complete over 10,000 miles this year.
I'm getting the impression that you must have gone through more than one pair of trainers since January.
Everybody asks about how many shoes I wear. I don't actually go through any. What I do is I rotate my shoes so that they don't get wore out or anything, keep the cushioning and the support in them, and I'm using around about 25 pairs.
Tell me, I should have asked you first, I suppose, really, what inspired you to do this?
I became a fundraiser for Macmillan Cancer Support in 2003. My dad was diagnosed with cancer in 1997 and he passed away in 2003 of an unrelated illness, and I wanted to do something in his memory. And I thought back to the day that we told he had cancer and how other families were going to be told that devastating news. There's around about 1,000 people diagnosed with cancer every day, 350,000 a year. It's a lot of people. And when you're told that one word, your world turns upside down. I wanted to offer people who was in the same situation that we'd been the support through the charities that I raise funds for. So I became a fundraiser, and I've done lots of challenges in the last 20 years, raised around about £1 million.
I suppose in a way that perhaps not so many people realise, your physical effort every day, I suppose it keeps in the forefront of your mind what it means to be physically well enough to do what you're doing.
Yeah, people often talk about mental strength and what it takes to do what I'm doing. And some people, if you haven't run a marathon before or you're not a runner, you might just think, oh, he's doing a marathon, is he? But it does take a lot to get up every single morning and put your shoes on in all weather conditions and get out there. I think you've got to remember that we've had the hottest summer on record, 30 odd degrees when we were running, but it's all on my terms. If I want to slow things down and we take more water on board, then that's what we'll do. It can be physically demanding. You've got to manage your niggles and your injuries. But whatever I'm going through, somebody's going through worse. And I always say that to people. We've had all sorts of weather thrown at us. We live in Cumbria, you know. We have 4 seasons in one day. I always say to people when it's raining, and today it rained from start to finish, and I always say that when it's raining, somebody's going to be in a cancer ward, they're going to be ringing the bell to signify that they're cancer-free. When they go outside, they're going to see the rain and they're going to say, this is the nicest rain we've ever had. So I always say to people, we're running in somebody else's rain. And that sort of message picks people up, it gives them that little lift, and we go again. And I just think that I'm doing what I'm capable of doing. I think if more people done what they were capable of doing, we would live in a better world.
Gary McKee, obviously the details have been of how people can, get involved in giving and providing some support for what you're doing. That's been running under this the pictures all the time we've been talking, and hopefully people will do that. But Gary, you are truly a great Briton. Just listening to the calm and self-deprecating and reasoned way you describe running a marathon every day before you go to your work. If that doesn't make a great Briton, I don't know what does. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a splendid chap, and I'm delighted that I was able to spend some time with you.
Thanks very much.
Great stuff. It's just gone 7 o'clock. This is Neil Oliver live on TV, online and on DAB+ radio.
It's 7 o'clock. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The firebombing of an immigration processing centre in Dover was motivated by an extreme right-wing terrorist ideology, according to police. Counter-terrorism officers have recovered digital media devices as part of their investigation. Andrew Leake from High Wycombe is believed to have thrown up to 3 incendiary devices at the centre last weekend. However, there were no major injuries. The 66-year-old was later found dead by police at a nearby petrol station. GB News has learned that detainees armed with various weapons have caused a disturbance at an immigration centre in London. The Home Office says the incident happened in the early hours of this morning during a power cut at Harmondsworth Removal Centre. No one was injured and authorities remain at the scene. The centre currently has more than 600 immigrants being processed for removal from the country. The United Nations chief says the world is doomed unless a historic pact is signed between rich and poor countries. The warning from Antonio Guterres comes ahead of the COP27 summit next week. Wealthy nations have already promised to find almost £88 billion a year to help poor nations tackle climate change. The scheme was originally meant to start in 2020, but it's now not expected to happen until next year. A series of rail strikes, which were due to start today, have been called off, but the government warns there'll still be significant disruption over the next few days. The RMT stopped the walkout after securing a pay offer, which they're now negotiating. Not everyone supports the move. Former Assistant General Secretary at the RMT, Steve Headley, told GB News members are furious as they had no say.
In a situation where the strike's been called off and the members don't know why. And the explanations being given at the minute don't make sense. Intensive negotiations, well, what were they doing before? If there's a deal on the table, let the members have a look at it. The members will soon say yes or no.
Thousands have marched in central London today calling for a general election due to issues including the rising cost of living. The Britain is Broken protest saw a coalition of trade unions and community organisations march from Embankment to Trafalgar Square. Organised by the People's Assembly, former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was among the speakers, whilst protesters accused the government of being not fit for purpose. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has described inflation as the #1 enemy and vowed to rebuild trust in the government. Sinn Féin's leader says a joint authority between the British and Irish governments should be introduced if the executive in Northern Ireland cannot be restored. Mary Lou MacDonald made the comments ahead of her keynote speech at her party's conference. The country has been without a functioning executive since February as the DUP continues to boycott the Assembly over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Chair of the Northern Ireland Conservatives, Matthew Robinson, told us a solution needs to be found.
We either need a restoration of the devolved government, or we need some form of direct rule from Westminster. We deserve proper governance in Northern Ireland. We have a collapsing healthcare system here. I mean, we are in dire straits in terms of waiting times. We are in the middle of a cost of living crisis as well, just like the rest of the UK. We need proper governance.
We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're watching GB News, the People's Channel. Back now to Neil Oliver Live.
Thanks for all of that, Ray. Now, there are few sights more disgusting and depressing in equal measure than raw sewage being pumped into our rivers and seas. One of the latest incidents was at St Agnes in Cornwall, when the sea at Trevonan's Cove was turned sickening brown with human waste and other filth. All of that mess was completely legal. Such waste is supposed to go to treatment works, but the Environment Agency in England allows that when capacity is exceeded by heavy rain, water companies may dump the overspill into rivers and into the sea. Amongst the worst of the damage is that inflicted upon England's chalk streams. Described as the country's coral reefs, they are much rarer than that. There are only around 200 in the world, and 85% are in England. Paul Jennings is the chair of the group set up to protect one of those chalk streams, the River Chess, and he joins me now. Hello.
Hi, Neil.
Thank you for joining us. We showed some revolting footage there of sewage being dumped into the sea. Surely, in the 21st century, we are or should be a better nation than this in regards to our landscape.
We should be, and every time we raise this and we bring it to the people's attention, the public's attention, they're horrified. I started campaigning probably about 20 years ago, and at that point it was village halls, WI meetings, scout groups and all the rest of it. You got to that bit where you said, and do you realise our chalk stream is being polluted by sewage? It would be that jaw-dropping moment.
And that's
jaws would drop.
That's how long it's been going on. You've been trying to turn this back.
It's been going on longer than that. So back to 1985, the government were actively suppressing any information about sewage discharges into the sea and into rivers, actively avoiding telling the public about that information. And that's the climate that we're sort of trying to move away from, because it's been suppressed. And behind that, you have people like DEFRA and the Environment Agency as well, not doing their hardest to solve the problem. But it's beginning to change.
What's the point in having DEFRA and environment agencies if something like this is just happening, and not only is it happening, but governments after government after government obfuscates and turns a blind eye?
It's a very good question. What is the point? There's some very good people in the Environment Agency. They do some really good jobs. There's some fantastic scientists gathering data, but their jobs are being undermined by lack of resources and also by senior management really sort of putting pressure on them not to ask too many questions.
And the water companies who are doing this, they make plenty of money, do they not?
They do. And they've been issuing dividends over the last 20 or 30 years. They've been making interest payments for the loans that they've put in place. So there's money leaking out of that system, have been for 30 years, which, you know, I would argue should be spent on the infrastructure, upgrading what you've got. When nationalisation, privatisation went on back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, what the water companies were sold was effectively a rusty old Cortina. This wasn't top-of-the-range Mercedes. And they were left with this and had to deal with it and had to improve it. There was a very short period of time, I think, where there was a honeymoon and that was being taken on and it was being actively pursued. And then I think the water companies realised that they weren't being looked at too severely. DEFRA weren't qualified to sort them out. The regulator, didn't really understand how water companies worked. And as a result of that, they were given free rein.
It's harrowing, isn't it, Jasmine? You watch that footage and you think that's happening every day.
Well, absolutely. Well, I grew up with this because I grew up in Seaford in Sussex, and they used to pump out raw sewage into the sea. I swam in it, but, you know, they were doing that. And you're saying they're still doing that?
They're still doing it
Yeah.
on a huge basis. And we talked about water and rain, and this is the reason you have to do it. But it really only should be happening under exceptional circumstances. And what's been happening recently are far from exceptional.
The problem is, though, you see, as I'm listening to this, and we're talking about, you know, privatised situation, and as I was looking at the pictures, I was thinking it's the whole infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. So you think, should we nationalise it? Would that help it? And there's a sort of a constant question, you know, privatisation, nationalisation, both are useless, it seems to me, honestly, in whatever you look at, whether it's trains, whether it's gas and electricity, whether it's, you know, water. I don't know.
But ultimately, it's down to us, isn't it? I mean, it's our landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all very well, I suppose, to say with the Environmental Agency or DEFRA or whoever or the government should look after it, but ultimately it's down to us.
And the reason that we're seeing this and the attention has been focused on this is down to groups like ourselves. Fergal Sharkey, for example, a great advocate for resolving this problem. And there are groups around the country, the River Wharfe, the Lark, the Ivel, those sorts of places. They're making it known that this is happening, and public opinion's changing things.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that does seem to be, frankly, the only thing that is going to do it, because if DEFRA's not doing what they should be, if the government and certainly the companies, as you say, you know, if they're not actually forced to do it, why would they do it? But we, the people, it sounds, we need to get in there and go, clean it up, or else.
And Laura, it feels like inadvertently there's a theme running through the show tonight. You know, again, I come back to you mentioning the way in which we ought to feel connected to the landscape, and I suppose it comes down to that, doesn't it?
It does.
We need as individuals and collectively to take responsibility for our nest.
Definitely. I mean, I feel very connected to our rivers. I've got a couple of local rivers I like going swimming in. I'm now going to have to check whether any sewage gets released into them. I thought I only had to worry about water spiders getting into my ears, but apparently it's sewage. The thing is, you know, we, the people, do care about it. And in fact, we're very well trained by our government into a form of ritualised subservience to the environment. You know, we're sorting out recycling into different bins. Don't know if that does anything at all. Paying 10p for our bags, you know, so we don't use bags. And then at the same time, we've got the government knowingly chucking sewage into rivers. It just makes a mockery. You know, all the care seems to run in one direction and not the other.
Talk about the chalk streams, please.
So
just describe them.
These chalk streams, when they are running properly, when there is no sewage going in, when there's no runoff, because it's not just sewage, we've got arable runoff coming in, urban runoff going in as well. That's all pollutants. But when they're running well, I mean, like today, even though it was raining quite hard today, they were glorious. Sparkling, crystal clear water, gravel bottoms.
There's an image there.
There's an image there. And that's in an urban environment, which is fantastic.
What is it about them? Why are they this unique and exceptionally rare prize?
The water comes from a chalk aquifer, and that chalk aquifer filters out a lot of the impurities, and so what you get coming up into the river is really clean water. And as a result of that, things like grayling, brown trout, in the past, crayfish, but beautiful plants like ranunculus, which is like a little bobbing white plant that sits in there with lovely fronds of green, and the colours are just stunning, absolutely stunning. But unfortunately, so often we have these sewage discharges, and what happens? They get knocked back. But these things are happening so frequently now, they keep getting knocked back. They can recover, but if they get knocked back so regularly, you struggle. And if you get hit so many times, there will be a time when you say, you know what, I can't get up anymore.
We're back to beauty again, aren't we? Really? You know, it's beauty against industrialisation, against a lack of care, really, I think. So it does sound that, as you say, the groups are doing it, government's doing nothing, says surprise, but groups need to force the government and the private companies to do something.
You know what, I think there is a bit of a change in attitude from the companies. They now understand that there is an issue and there is a public resentment.
Or they can no longer ignore it, at least.
No, we have, you know, they're monopoly providers of sewage and water supply. So we are stuck. But if we make enough noise, they have consciences, and you can see that they're changing their attitudes, and help is beginning to happen. So that to me is the one encouragement I will take from it. But if we waited for government, DEFRA, Environment Agency, we'd be waiting forever.
I think we've got images actually of sewage running in your river, in the River Chess.
So that's urban urban discharges from a drainage system which isn't coping any longer.
And that should be crystal clear.
Actually, well, you can see on one side it is. So you've got one side is absolutely crystal clear, on the other side it's the colour of hot chocolate.
And that ain't no chocolate.
And that ain't no chocolate.
And is the government on side yet?
Slowly. There are certain parts of the government, certain individuals within government making lots of noise about it. But are they fully on board? Not yet, because I think they fear that there's a big bill out there waiting to be paid, because you, the government, sold these companies into private hands, and you can't just walk away and say, well, actually, it's not our responsibility anymore. So I think there's a concern. So is it a right time to be asking government to help? No, there's so many other things going on. I can't see them rushing to. But their concern is if they forced the water companies to do everything that is needed, the water companies would really struggle.
But it's almost a metaphor. You know, there's something rotten running through the arteries and bloodstream of the very place in which we live.
Yeah.
Made manifest in human waste and the rest of the things that go into.
Yeah.
And the more that we just sort of paper over these cracks, the more that we ignore that, the worse it's going to get. So it's going to be more expensive later on. And I think the reason we have a problem now is that it should have been done back in the 80s or probably 70s, honestly.
Absolutely. I mean, we've 30 or 40 years where we've had neglect of the system. It's going to take a long time to catch up on that.
Yeah.
Chalk streams need to be sexy. The thing is, everyone's talking about
the
coral. Well, I think so too, but we might be weird. We've got some kind of English nature paraphilia. No, I'm kidding, but everyone's talking about the coral reefs.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about our own chalk streams? This is our country, this is our land, and it's fixable. We can fix this.
Yeah.
I do agree, and there are some fantastic cameramen out there taking some beautiful pictures, and you will fall in love with them if you see it.
You've got me excited about crayfish. You see, you only have to mention something that I think is delicious that's in the river. Well, we've got to look after the crayfish.
Oh, yeah.
And the trout.
I'm afraid that's past. Our native crayfish are almost extinct.
The very idea, though, that there are only 200 or so of these natural wonders on the planet, and 85% of them are in England, and we're flushing the toilet into them. It just says something profound and deeply depressing.
Yes.
It is. Well, it's always a useful thing to have, a river, if you need to deal with sewage. Because if you've got an excess... I mean, one of the things, of course, we do get, on the positive side, is we get the clean effluent, which means that when we have a dry summer like we've had this year, we do actually have flow in the river. So you do need that, when I say effluent, it's being cleaned to a standard. So that's... that
We're going to have to leave it there, Jazz. We hold that thought. Paul Jennings, Chair of the River Chess Association, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was very enlightening, and if depressing, at least it's drawn attention to something so important. After the break, I'll be reunited with an old colleague who has written a new book about the 73-year marriage between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Back in a couple of minutes.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is. Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show. God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world. Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday on GB News. Join my new show, Bev Turner Today, from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday on GB News, on TV, on radio and online.
Good luck, Bev. We'll all be watching. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. With Britain and the Commonwealth still in the aftermath of the death of Her late Majesty, there's a new book out detailing the long marriage of Elizabeth and Philip. The work of historian and author Tessa Dunlop, it was planned to coincide with the couple's 75th wedding anniversary. Subtitled as The Story of Young Love, Marriage and the Monarchy, Elizabeth and Philip explores the ups and downs, the public appeal and the private tensions of that most famous and exceptionally long-lasting of relationships. Tessa joins me now. Hi, Tessa.
Hello, Neil.
We should probably get cards on the table and say this is not our first rodeo.
It's not. It's not. Are you going to spill the beans or not? Is there a visual to assist with this
I don't know. Is there? Is there a
there
picture?
should be. I sent one to your producer.
I'm
Basically,
told there's something coming.
Coast
There,
Guy.
look.
There we are. There we are together. So, Neil, famous.
Hopefully
for
I'm
his
sitting
dogs.
down there.
No, you're not. You're leaning.
Who's that wee fella on the right?
We were both presenters on Coast,
Mhm.
the brand that really is going to be emblazoned on your tombstone, whether you like it or not.
Absolutely, yes.
And the gutting thing was, I turned to Jasmine and Laura here, is that, you know, there I was with my blonde locks, you know, flowing in the wind, the sea spray on my younger then complexion, but it was Neil that won the hearts and minds. Oh my God, Coast was Neil's.
Yes.
And the women in the street, they were like, yeah. Have you met Neil? What's Neil like? No,
Yeah.
what's he
Look,
really
I'm loving this, but we have to...
Let's go back to that picture. 'Cause who do we think's aged best?
Oh,
yeah.
Couldn't say,
Well, look-
couldn't possibly say.
It's the spectacles and beard.
Well, you see, what's happened to me in the intervening period is I got wolfhounds, and you know what they say? You do end up looking like you're out. So that's what's happened to me.
Is that why you grew the old
That's why
second-hand beard?
Yeah, that's why it happened almost by osmosis, I think.
And I like, is this from your Australian coast that you wear this bandana?
This is, do you know, this thing started because sound men need somewhere to put a mic.
That's true.
And this is, when you work outside in the wind, this is a great multi-purpose wind buff. Gag thing.
You know,
we have to get look.
I know, but I just want to say he's not the right man to make the gag. That doubles up as the perfect COVID mask, Neil.
God forbid. God forbid. This is what we're really here to talk about, rather than my hair and my clothes.
Yeah.
Elizabeth and Philip. This is the book. Why? You know, you're a historian. What pulled you into the gravitational pull of Elizabeth and Philip?
Because all my last 3 oral history books were about women in the 20th century, century girls, those born in 1918, to track, you know, post-emancipation, 100 years post-emancipation, the Bletchley girls, the women who worked at Bletchley Park, and then finally the Army girls. And the Army girls was the biggest trigger for me. I wrote with 17 women over the age of 95 who served in the female army, the ATS. And of course, the Queen served as a princess in that same service, albeit for 2 months. And I got very struck. They all were so keenly associated with this woman, really the only pin-up for nonagenarians, pretty silent and even more silent in the pandemic, do you know? And so I wrote to the Queen. I thought, well, let's see if I can interview her for a book. And one of the women in my book was Lady Martha Bruce, who was the recipient of the Queen's nanny Crawfie before Elizabeth acquired her, because of course it was all Scots together. Lady Martha Bruce, you'll know that, was up in Scotland in Dunfermline, and just next door was the Strathmores, and they stole basically Lady Martha's nanny. Anyway, Crawfie, who then obviously splurged it all in a memoir, and ever since then the name has never been
persona non grata.
Yeah, absolutely. So that for me was a trigger. The other thing was the textbook wartime romance that Elizabeth had with Philip. All these girls had the most extraordinary, enduring crushes. Men had never had a higher cachet. Forget Neil Oliver on Coast. These guys, you know, they were like the heroes. And people talk about, oh, women, you know, were put in uniform and they had their moment. Yeah, but that was trumped by men on the front line losing their lives. They come back, these boys are heroes. Women, of course, are told, leave the workplace, get back and breed for Britain. But to do that, you have to bag a man. And my goodness, Elizabeth was textbook. She met Philip in 1939. She was sticking pictures of him from press cuttings into her scrapbook in 1940. And this persistent and enduring just knowledge, sort of a knowingness, a steadfastness about him being the right husband for her. And of course, in the wake of the abdication in 1936, she understood how important it was to have the right husband. And in the end, and there's a lot within the court and in the press who are like, hey, no, not a Greek, not a foreigner, not this kind of slightly vulgar man he's got a bit of chutzpah, you know, he's a bit too confident. The Queen then was very unsure, and the press likewise. But, you know, Elizabeth got her way, and I love her for that.
Who was the boss in that marriage?
That's hugely complex. And that was another reason why it's utterly fascinating, because these women, almost all of them, and some are still alive, I use some of their voices and I lean on them in the book, Daphne of 99. These women were conventional. They were born in, you know, traditional Britain where gender spheres were very separate. They took off their uniform, they got yoked having children and went back behind the kitchen sink. And the Queen, of course, had this anomalous position. What happens is she cedes to him privately because she's got the big gig. But you know what else was really interesting when I start exploring it, is the problems weren't between Philip and Elizabeth. The problems with all the men, especially the old bottocks, the suits, including Churchill, who comes back into power, arguably shouldn't really have done. They love their peaches and cream young queen, but really they could do without Philip. Do you know what I mean?
Does it foreshadow the fact that he was certainly perceived as foreign at the time? He was a foreign interloper coming in, marrying into the royal family.
Fortune hunter.
Does it foreshadow, you know, the Meghan Markle story?
They're very, very distinct parallels. Both of them were sublimely beautiful. I think we can agree on that. Whatever you think about Meghan Markle, she's very beautiful. She's a very beautiful woman. And Philip, I mean, one of the other incentives, if I'm going to be really honest about writing the book, is I opened in the Army Museum archive, pulled out this drawer, a poster-sized picture of Philip in his naval uniform. I mean, I wasn't immune to having a little moment, I'm going to be honest with you.
He's handsome.
Yeah.
But can I ask you something? I think all women who aren't married might even want to know this as well. You talk about their early years. How did she know that he was the right husband? Because she was right. They did have this amazing marriage. So how did she know? What do you know about how she knew?
I think she genuinely fancied him. She had a proper...
It's just chemistry.
Crush. I think there was a bit of chemistry, but also there was a familiarity. But this is something else the press didn't write. You know, they shared Queen Victoria as, I think, their great-great-grandmother. His grandmother was born in Windsor Castle. They were third cousins. So there was a kind of feeling that he understood, and this is where he differs from Meghan Markle.
He was to the manor born.
Understood the gig of monarchy, and he understood the indignity of exile, the indignity of being special but impoverished. And that's why a lot of the courtiers in the press didn't trust him. You know, why is this stunningly beautiful man, as Daphne, aged 99, says, well, he was absolutely good looking. I mean, the Queen was okay, but he was absolutely good looking. So why was this man, you know, going for a girl who arguably wasn't his aesthetic equal, but of course so much bigger than him in other ways? And I think there was a lot of scepticism.
And there's so much more in the book. You know, obviously it's that marriage that holds centre stage. But I found it quite affecting to read about George VI. Our father, and how the extent of his illness was kept from him, a grown man. But the court couldn't tell him. That's quite affecting.
It is affecting, but you know, the king and the Queen omnipresent. They live forever until they die. I think we also had a very complex, Britain as a whole, and who knows, within the palace, complex relationship with the idea of the Queen's mortality. This sort of, you know, mobility issues. I mean, when clearly she was a very frail and extremely old woman. And statistically, we know that nobody really lives well over 100. I mean, I know a lot of these extremely old women, and post 100, it's pretty dicey. So the end was almost nigh, but none of us could really own it. That's why, bizarrely, aged 96, her death shocked us. There's something, and her father, who dies, of course, half a century earlier, he's 56.
And had to be protected from the reality of his situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, but I remember in the wake of the Diana, this was fascinating in the archival research, in the wake of Diana's death in 1997, it's their 50th wedding anniversary, Philip and Elizabeth's. She stands up, banqueting hall, and she doesn't apologise. The Queen, that wasn't the Queen's style, but she owned that it's really hard to read public opinion. And I can't remember the exact words of the quote, but you know, that there's different strains of opinion. Sometimes the advice, you know, is contradictory. Who are you listening to? And I think
there's a good line about the Queen says recollections may vary.
Indeed, they may vary. And I think with George, you know, you think that they weren't even honest with him about his condition. You know, how much truth do the royal family really hear? It's filtered through all sorts of means, and in a way there, I wonder if social media, while it's brutal, and a lot of it you can't read below the line, my goodness, I've had a week of it. I mean, you'll know this. All of you will know about it. But the royal family at least now have a direct interface in some ways.
Sorry, Jasmine,
I was just thinking, I mean, speaking of truth, what about all the noise and all the talk about when it comes to Fidelity? What did you find out there?
Yeah, that was I found that challenging to write about. I didn't shy away from it. There's quite a lot written already in a very coded way. And of course, The Crown's out this week, and they go to town on that latter-day friendship Philip had with Lady Romsey, Penny. There were question marks. I mean, the courtiers were saying it's unlikely he'll be faithful, you know, before they even married.
Oh, nice.
And he'd had some one of the my Bletchley veterans, was good friends with Osler Benning, his very beautiful girlfriend. I knew the Prince of Greece. I tell you what, I was so disappointed when I met him. He was terribly English sounding, like this. So there were rumours. It was an itch he scratched all his life, and even now, you know, his will is under wraps for 90 years. That's not by an act of Parliament.
No, exactly.
I was struck too. There's a quote. You quote James Pope Hennessy in 1957 on an encounter with the Queen, and he said she's not shy, but she's clearly living at great tension, and does not give the impression of happiness. Her hands are thin and worried-looking. She simply cannot remain still. That's not a picture that by now a description that we associate with the Queen of all queens.
And that's what's so interesting. Also, in that week, her mourning period, people talked about her wonderful smile. She was constantly being berated for being glum and not smiling enough. And when she went overseas, especially Australia and America, They all went for Philip. They said he outshines the Queen. Of course, we didn't say that in Britain. A foreigner outshined the Queen. But we were very critical. There was that famous, I think The Crown did an episode on it, the article. And what they don't explore is he says, oh, she's tweedy and has a terrible voice and so forth and doesn't have a personality. At the same time as he pretty much raves about Philip. But I think the Queen was grateful for anything that bolstered Philip. In that way, she understood that he's the alpha male in effectively a beta role within this, constitutional marriage. But Pope Hennessy, it was a difficult year. It was all the scandal was brewing. His equerry, then private secretary, had been forced to resign because of an affair. There were rumours that constantly billowed around, what about Philip with his funny friends? The Queen, they had an unusual marriage model. They didn't go for the companionate marriage that all these girls post-war did, under the kitchen sink, your husband's your everything. They had a different, more independent model, and, they were old-fashioned, so guess what? They didn't let the daylight in, unlike the more modern Windsors, and very deliberately.
Tessa Dunlop, it's been so good to catch
It's a
up with you
blast from the
after all
past,
this time.
Give us are we allowed to give a wee hug? A wee coast hug, eh?
Oh, a moment there. Elizabeth and Philip, that's the book. And delight to see you again, and thank you for reminding us of Elizabeth the Queen as a young woman, which is the part I especially enjoyed. Great to see you. What fun. From all around the country come reports of people injured and frightened after having fireworks thrown at them. To take just a few examples, 2 firefighters needed hospital treatment after a lit firework was thrown through the window of the fire station in Redbridge in Hampshire. In Stratford, fireworks were launched towards a mother pushing a pram, and in Dundee, police had to deal with rioters who set fires, smashed windows and hurled fireworks at officers. Louder and louder grew the calls for an outright ban so that fireworks are limited only to officially organised events and not freely available to the public. Joining me now to judge the scale of the problem is Hampshire's Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna Jones. Hello, Donna. Are you there?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Now, in the run-up to every bonfire night, we hear stories like these. Is the problem actually getting worse year on year?
Well, actually, I think the evidence shows that, yes, it is. There have always been sort of it's often a time of year, both Halloween and bonfire night, when you get groups of kids, teenagers particularly, out together. But what I do think over the last 4 or 5 years, and particularly we saw last year and this year, is that there are cases in some very serious circumstances, like that case in Dundee that you've just shown over the last day or so, where fireworks are used as missiles. And this also happened in my own force, as you said, through Redbridge Fire Station, which is in Southampton. And it happened in Hampshire last year as well, with fireworks being used as missiles, cars being turned over, a car being set alight. Very similar to that of what we've seen in Dundee. So unfortunately, I think this is probably a reflection of some sort of social breakdown. It is completely unacceptable. There needs to be more recourse towards these teenagers who are creating chaos in communities and using bonfire night and Halloween as an excuse to do that. But I think a total ban on fireworks is probably a step too far and would mean that millions of people across the country would be, detrimented because of the bad behaviour of handfuls of teenagers.
You mentioned social breakdown. That's quite a thought. Is it to do, bonfire night is one night, and the run-up to it, it's a brief period of days. Is it symptomatic of that we're not seeing police on the beat? That the police in society are largely invisible in a way that, I remember in my childhood, the police being around.
Yes, I think that is definitely a very key factor. It's the same with shoplifting. It's, people shoplifting now, very often the police are not able to get there quick enough, and therefore ramifications for them are largely a light touch. That's the way they see it. It's the same with a lot of crimes that happen in communities, in neighbourhoods, with antisocial behaviour being another one. And that's why the government have been pushing the police uplift so strongly. It's why it's important that I really hope, going into the next general election, that both of the main political parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, come up with Uplift Mark II, because there is no better way to address this kind of social breakdown of shoplifting, bonfire night, using fireworks as missiles, setting fire to cars, creating havoc in communities, particularly with teenagers, than having more cops on the streets. More cops means more detection and more prevention. And very often when it comes to neighbourhood policing, it's not actually rocket science. It is about having boots on the ground. It's about having police visibility, as you've just said. And that for me is absolutely something that I'm committed to, and to be lobbying for that nationally as well.
Jasmine, it's great to hear that kind of forthright argument coming up. I think it's what everybody instinctively knows, that you need to have more police and you need to see the police on foot in the community.
But also, I think the police need to have, again, we're talking about traditional stuff. Keep talking about traditions here, but they need to have a traditional approach that, you know, right is right and wrong is wrong. Most of us are a bit sick of hearing about them really arresting people for something they've said on Twitter. We'd like, you know, genuine policing that really deals with this, with actual harms, rather than these sort of social media nonsense.
Laura, are you seeing in your community, on your patch, are you social breakdown, feral youth, all of this? Are you seeing that in a way that you didn't 10 years ago? Or?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's kind of unfair to pick on firework night. I mean, most people use fireworks for fun. And I don't think it's very often they're being used for missiles. One thing that wasn't mentioned there in the wider picture of social breakdown is knife crime. Now, I have 2 teenage boys, my boys included. In my social circle, in the last week, there have been 3 muggings with knives. And that's a combination of park during the day, high street in early evening, and coming out of a party at night. The answer has to be neighbourhood policing. The question it's not a question of banning fireworks. That's not going to solve the bigger social breakdown that was referred to. And knife crime and muggings, that's related to other things. You know, there's so many big society-wide issues to address. We have a youth who are really disaffected. You know, don't forget they were out of school for over half a year. A lot of them didn't feel particularly welcome back. I have teenage boys, I'm really close to this. I actually worry about them coming home at night because it is so common. And I live in a suburb in Surrey. I don't even live in a ghetto.
Donna, you're listening to that. I'm sure, you know, that idea of Laura and Jasmine both echoing that sentiment that this society, the communities don't feel safe in a way that they did, not so very long ago.
Yeah, and I think they are really, really valid points. And actually, the epidemic of knife carrying in this country is out of control. I've been on GB News before talking about how people didn't carry knives unless they were quite serious criminals 10 years ago, and they certainly didn't 20 years ago. And now you have teenagers who come from all backgrounds, and they're not criminalized kids. When you ask them why they're carrying a knife, they often say, to protect myself because others are. And that, therefore, exactly as we've just heard, I think, from Jasmine, about more police, more neighbourhood policing officers, greater visibility. Like I say, it's not rocket science, it's a numbers game. The more that teenagers think that there will be a repercussion for kicking a wing mirror off, for using a firework as a missile, for setting fire to a bin shed, or for carrying a knife, the less likely they are to do it. It's about punishment, it's about accountability, and also parents clearly have a part to play in this as well.
Absolutely. Donna Jones, Hampshire's Police and Crime Commissioner. Great to hear such forthright comments from you. Thank you for your time. We'll leave it there. After the break, we'll continue the Bonfire Night theme by tasting some drinks made specially for the occasion. I'll see you in 2 or 3 minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Live from 8, it's the premiere of Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In, and I'll be taking your video calls from 8 p.m. in the People's Hour, in which you get to have your say. From 9, has the focus on mental health now become an obsession, a religion almost? Notwithstanding serious mental health problems, whatever happened to the stiff upper lip? And millionaire woke hypocrite Gary Neville gets his comeuppance on Have I Got News For You? My reaction in my take at 10. It's Bonfire night and we've got fireworks for 3 hours. You won't want to miss a second. We're live from 8. See you then.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. It's been ever so busy here in the studio while you were watching someone else, and it will all become apparent why as this goes on. Finally, this evening, for those minded to celebrate Bonfire Night in an altogether more civilised fashion, how about a nightcap? My last guest, formerly a chef at celebrity chef Heston Blumenthal's Fat Duck restaurant, knows a thing or two about two of my favourite things, coffee and booze. Ashley Palmer-Watts, former Michelin-starred chef and founder of the Artisan Coffee Company, joins me now to hopefully generate nothing more hazardous than a warm glow by making some coffee-inspired bonfire night drinks. Hello, Ashley.
Hi.
Great to have you.
Thank you very much.
And so much work that went in those 2 or 3 minutes there to assemble all of this. What you're going to treat us to, are these your own recipes? Are these unique?
Yeah, these are unique. So using our artisan coffee, I've made some cold brew, which looks kind of a bit messy there, but basically you put the coffee into the water, leave it for 10 hours in the fridge, pour it off, and you've got something that resembles that, really, really clear, but really have a smell.
So that's a base?
Yeah, so this is a cold brew. It's like a cold extraction in this one.
Yep.
So when I taste this, I always think of like rum and whiskey. So then I thought, well, actually, if I take some rum and whiskey out of some classic drinks, put the cold brew in, you can obviously have a few more.
For example, what would be some of your offerings?
Well, so this one we'll try first. This is called a mockatini. So we've got a chocolate infused vodka that made by just simply grating chocolate into some vodka for about 6 hours.
Wow.
And then some of our cold brew and our coffee liqueur as well.
And the vodka takes on the chocolate?
Yeah, it's really, really good at pulling flavour into it. It's a really good distillate, as you call it. So, yeah, have a little taste of that. This is a sort of grown-up...
what did you call this?
This is a mockatini, so it's like a small espresso martini. This one.
Thank you. Wow, chocolate, coffee, and vodka. This is going to be dangerous.
Oh, that's one of those things. That's lethally dangerous. You could just drink that not knowing there was an alcoholic.
Small pause on that one because it's
really
quite.
Two of the things that I loathe the most. So, you know, nothing personal.
That's
coffee and alcohol.
Really?
Oh,
Really?
loathe it. Absolutely loathe the
what do you
taste of
think,
coffee.
Laura?
Hate alcohol.
This is a triad of deliciousness. I'm sorry, but this is coffee, chocolate, and alcohol. I'm happy.
But it's just a nice little thing to end on.
It is. But that's a dangerous drink.
Yeah.
You know, you could.
Now this one's probably a little bit more
more.
Moorish than that one. This is our version of a coffee liqueur, so a bit like a Baileys or a Tia Maria, made with milk and cream, condensed milk, a caramel, espresso, which we use a whole bean for, big shot, some vodka, and this is rather nice. This is
condensed milk, possibly the sweetest substance known to humanity.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, used sensibly, like anything, and used with a little bit of skill mixed in there, you end up with something very tasty.
Why do you think coffee works with alcohol? 'Cause it seems ironic to me that because people take coffee to get over the effects of alcohol, but yet if you bring them together in the first place, they work.
Yeah, I think you should. I'll line them up for you. No, I think one of the great things is, I mean, the espresso martini, you know, is one of the most popular cocktails in this country. So people love this idea of alcohol with a little pick-me-up, give it that caffeine boost. So these are just different alternates for that in itself. So
the name of us ordering this...
We're just going to call this one a coffee cream, sort of after-dinner coffee cream.
So I'm lactose intolerant, so I miss all these really lovely creamy ones. Looks
oh
good,
my
smells
good
good
grief,
from
that's
here.
a fantastic thing.
That's all right, that one, isn't it?
That's sweeties. That's liquid alcoholic sweeties. Oh.
Now this one in here, I'm going to make an old-fashioned with this one.
Oh.
So in here I've got rum, I've got some bitters, I've got our cold brew concentrate going in. Then I've made this really nice syrup with muscovado sugar, allspice, cloves, star anise, a little bit of orange zest. So that's instead of crushing it down with sugar.
How marvellous.
And then we're just going to take some ice.
No, amazing.
We're going to stir
I didn't know this about you.
No, I can't bear coffee, and I never drank alcohol in my life.
Really?
Horrible stuff. Yeah, no.
So delicious.
I'll believe you.
So just going to stir this one down just to get this one. Oh.
That sounds like it's going to be really autumnal, quite wintry, almost
Really
Christmassy
wintry.
with those flavours in there. So this is one to really get into the mood for the season, isn't it?
That's a small masterpiece, there.
It's rather nice, that one. I really like that one. Actually, we use that instead.
Oh, that's so deadly dangerous. You could drink half a pint of that.
Is that what
or
you
you
do
could
with
tell
these
yourself you
things?
could.
Aren't you on a caffeine break, Neil?
Yeah, but
You're off the wagon now, aren't you?
When the devil drives, you just have to go with the flow.
There we go. Right, and we're just going to express some of the oils of the orange over this one. In it goes. So that one in there.
So that's going to be quite a Christmassy flavour, isn't it?
This is perfect winter after dinner, and what you can do with this, you can
It's
have
an
everything
old-fashioned.
made. You can make this really easily at home.
Thank you.
But you can have them all batch made, like I've got them in the bottles here, and then you can just simply pour them out overnight.
That smells much more dangerous.
Oh, that smells like more like my kind of drink. A little bit dangerous. There's a John Donne poem, It's Always Autumn in Heaven, with one of these cocktails.
There you go.
That's a very autumn cocktail.
So this is an old-fashioned. You can.
So what we've done is we've taken some of the rum out, we've put the cold brew in, so you're kind of lowering the alcohol content, so you could probably have one or two more than you normally would do, and it will keep you awake instead of putting you to sleep.
It's a marvellous. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm not an adventurous, drinker. I drink, limit myself to wine really, but I can absolutely see the appeal of these, especially on a special occasion.
This is lovely. This is like party, alchemy and poetry in a glass.
Yeah, it's just good fun, this one. So this next one...
We're going to run out of time on this. So you keep mixing.
I'll keep
do this
mixing.
after the lights have gone out. Ashley, that is an absolutely excellent and eye-opening introduction to these coffee drinks, but I'm going to have to move on from all of that. That's all from me for this evening. My thanks, as always, to my panel, Jasmine Birtles and Laura Dodsworth and Ashley. I'll be back at 6 o'clock next Saturday. Next up, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In. Mark, what have you got for us?
Well, Neil, I've got to say, you're making me thirsty with all those cocktails. Of course, there are fireworks happening, but we've got a few fireworks in the studio as well. For the premiere of Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In, does the world need Donald Trump back in the White House? We'll speak to Kinsey Schofield live from Hollywood, California. But for the first hour, it's your video calls in the People's Hour. See you in 2.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK will be unsettled with rain across the southeast and a band of heavy showers approaching the west. Here are the details. Across Scotland, it's a bright start in the far east. However, a band of showers already across the west will arrive during the course of the morning as winds strengthen. It's a drier picture across Northern Ireland with sunny spells and scattered showers, these most frequent in the west, some eastern areas remaining dry. After a bright start, a band of blustery showers are crossing the Irish Sea early Sunday, arriving during the course of the morning. Looking at North Wales, a band of showers continues to push eastwards, with some heavy and possibly thundery bursts in places. Dry initially across the far east, with temperatures in single figures. Midlands starts Sunday rather cloudy, perhaps with some mist and fog patches, particularly across Lincolnshire, with this lifting into low cloud during the morning. A few sunny spells in the far west. It's a rather cloudy start across much of East Anglia, with showery outbreaks of light rain and drizzle slowly clearing eastwards, temperatures reaching into the low to mid-teens later. It's a wet start across the south and east of the country, with outbreaks of heavy rain slowly easing eastwards during the morning, drier and brighter the further west you go. The rain and cloud across the southeast will clear as a band of blustery showers push in from the west. And that's how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on